November 1942. A German officer makes his way through the mist-covered streets of Copenhagen. He never hears the shot that kills him. He never notices the weapon. One second he's walking, the next he's lying dead on the cobblestones, while his attacker is already blocks away with the gun hidden inside a coat sleeve. The device used to kill him hardly resembled a firearm at all, more like a piece of piping pulled from a workshop. No trigger guard, no refined contours, no polished finish. By normal standards, it was the most unattractive weapon ever issued to British forces, yet it became the most effective clandestine tool of the war. The well-rod pistol wasn't built to win firefights. It was built to fight an entirely different conflict, one conducted in alleys, occupied cities, and at point-blank distance between a resistance operative and a target who would never hear his own death. Its sound signature was so faint that many victims collapsed before anyone nearby realized a gunshot had occurred. Back in 1941, British intelligence faced a stark problem. The Special Operations Executive, the SOE, had been instructed by Winston Churchill to ignite resistance movements across Europe. Agents were being deployed into territories under German control. Underground networks were forming, and sabotage missions were being organized. But one essential capability was still missing. When an SOE operative needed to kill silently, the tools available were primitive. Knives demanded close proximity. Garrots required strength and perfect timing. Poisons were unreliable and slow. What agents needed was a firearm capable of delivering a lethal shot at close quarters without alerting nearby German troops. Existing suppressed weapons simply weren't quiet enough. A suppressed Sten gun produced roughly 130 dB, about as loud as a jackhammer. It muffled the crack of gunfire, but it was nowhere near silent. Typical silenced pistols of the time still hit around 120 dB, clearly audible across a street or through building walls within 50 meters. SOE required something unprecedented, a weapon so quiet it could be used inside a crowded building unnoticed, simple enough to never fail, and compact enough to hide effortlessly. The specifications seemed almost unrealistic. The assignment landed on a small development team at the Inter-Services Research Bureau's Station 9 in Welwyn Garden City. The lead designer was Major Hugh Reeves, supported by engineers whose identities largely remain buried in classified archives. They approached the problem not as traditional gunsmiths, but as specialists in acoustics. A gunshot produces noise from three sources: the explosive gases leaving the barrel, the sonic crack from a bullet breaking the sound barrier, and the mechanical cycling of the firearm. To achieve true silence, all three had to be addressed. They began with the ammunition. Standard 9mm parabellum rounds travel around 350 meters per second, faster than the speed of sound, roughly 343 meters per second at sea level, creating a guaranteed sonic crack. The workaround was straightforward. Keep using 9mm rounds, but load them with reduced powder so the muzzle velocity dropped to about 290 meters per second. Subsonic, quiet in flight. Next, they tackled mechanical noise. Semi-automatic pistols generate significant sound from the slide moving, ejecting casings, and chambering new rounds. The well-rod avoided this entirely by abandoning semi-automatic operation. Instead, it used a simple manual bolt system. The shooter turned a knurled knob at the back to extract a spent casing and load the next. Slow, yes, but nearly noiseless. The hardest challenge was suppressing the escaping gases. When a bullet exits the barrel, the gases behind it erupt outward, creating the familiar gunshot bang. The well-rod solved this with an integrated suppressor that was both radical and effective. The suppressor wasn't an attachment, it was the front 2/3 of the entire weapon. Inside was a sequence of baffles and expansion chambers. When fired, gases were forced through this maze, expanding and cooling gradually before being released. The result was astonishing. A normal 9mm pistol produces around 160 decibels, loud enough to cause immediate, lasting hearing damage. The well-rod produced about 73 decibels, comparable to the sound of a car door closing. Added a distance of 10 meters, the noise blended into normal city ambiance, and all of this was contained in a weapon roughly 14 inches long. The well rod's grip was nothing more than a straight metal tube wrapped in rubber for a firmer hold. Inside, it sat a 6-round magazine, later increased to 8 in improved versions. From the front extended a barrel that looked uncannily like a length of basic plumbing pipe. There was no trigger guard, only a small curved trigger protruding from the underside. The sights were as plain as possible: a fixed front blade and a rear notch. Precision at distance was never the goal. The pistol's effective range was around 23 meters, though its true purpose lay much closer. This was a weapon meant for point-blank encounters, pressed against a target, or fired across a small room. At such distances, accuracy hardly mattered. What mattered was silence, and in that respect, the well rod exceeded every expectation. Production began in late 1942. The precise number manufactured remains uncertain even now, with estimates ranging anywhere from 2,800 to nearly 14,000. The wide margin reflects the extraordinary secrecy involved. Serial numbers were intentionally scattered to obscure total output. Documentation was kept to a minimum, and a significant portion of the records was deliberately destroyed. What is known is that the first operational use occurred in early 1943. SOE operatives began receiving well rods through covert supply drops throughout occupied Europe. The weapon quickly earned admiration among resistance groups. In France, the Maquis used it for what they grimly referred to as executive actions. German officers notorious for brutality against civilians had a tendency to die quietly. Collaborators who endangered resistance cells simply disappeared. The well rod made assassinations possible in situations where any conventional firearm would have been suicidal. One reported incident describes a target eliminated in a bustling Paris cafe. The assassin strolled out past dozens of patrons, none of whom realized anything was amiss until the body was found.
In Denmark, the Holger-Danske resistance employed the well rod extensively. Their targets included Danish Nazis, Gestapo informants, and German intelligence personnel. Thanks to the pistol's near-silent operation, missions that required daylight movement in dense urban areas became realistically achievable. In Norway, SOE sabotagers relied on well rods to quietly remove guards before demolitions. Those few seconds of confusion after a silent kill often determined whether a team escaped or was captured. The psychological toll on German occupiers was striking. Officers began to understand that quiet surroundings offered no safety. The absence of gunfire no longer meant the absence of lethal threat. Recruiting informants became increasingly difficult. After all, betraying the resistance might result in a death delivered without sound, warning, or even the chance to cry out. Now, comparing the well rod to what Germany and the United States produced at the time illustrates just how advanced it was. German suppressed weapons were mostly modified versions of standard service pistols. The Walther PPK, for example, could be fitted with a screw-on suppressor that reduced noise to about 115 decibels, quieter than normal, but unmistakably a gunshot. More importantly, German suppressor technology was largely designed for snipers whose priority was concealment of origin rather than truly silent kills in crowds. The United States developed the high-standard HDM, a suppressed .22 caliber pistol used by the OSS. It was impressively quiet at around 90 decibels, but the .22 round lacked the necessary stopping power. Multiple shots were frequently required to guarantee a kill, and thick winter clothing often reduced penetration. The well rod's reduced charge 9mm ammunition delivered far greater lethality. A simple comparison makes the difference obvious. Well rod, about 73 decibels with a 9mm round. HDM, about 90 decibels with a .22 LR. German pistols, rarely quieter than 115 decibels. In the cold calculus of silent killing, the well rod stood in a class entirely its own. However, the design had one significant drawback. The integrated suppressor was not permanent. Rubber wipes inside the baffle system, which sealed around each bullet as it passed through, would gradually wear out, and with that wear, the pistol's remarkable silence would begin to fade.